You know what? I'm going to do the EastWest Hollywood solo harp as well. Hi there, this is Sam with Second Tier Sound. Really nice to see you, perhaps again this week. I decided to make 2 videos this week covering the harp as well, and then we have completed the Hollywood Symphony Orchestra. Completed? Wait a minute, you haven't covered the cello and violin, somebody might say, and that is correct. And unfortunately, I won't do that because I just don't consider them that great. They just haven't aged that well, let's say. Today, there are way better libraries that do that much, much better. So I'm sorry, I won't cover that. Anyway, let's talk about the harp because I think that it's an excellent library. It doesn't maybe have all the bells and whistles that newer harp library does, but it has an attention to detail and it is very, very well recorded. So let's get into that library and learn all about it right now. All right, let's look at the EastWest Hollywood Solo Harp. Let's open up the Play Engine. And this looks pretty much the same as the other libraries. There's one little difference though, and we're talking about the mic positions. Normally you would have the close and then mid and then main and then surround. But here you actually have close, then close vintage, mid, mid vintage, and main. The main difference here is, or the main reason I should say, is because this is a solo instrument. And so you want that close mic position in order to get that close sound. So they give you more options of what kind of close sound you want. And then a little bit of mid to get more of the room as well. So the reason they have panned this is because when the mic is so close, it will sound like the instrument is right in front of you. So you pan it a little bit to the left so you get that effect that the harp is placed correctly in the orchestra. And here you don't need it because the room will take care of that for you. It will sound like it's on the left. Right, so I would leave it as it is here. Otherwise you can experiment if you have the option. Normally the patches in the other libraries do not turn on the reverb by default, but in the solo it does for some reason. So I usually turn it off because I like my own reverbs. Otherwise there's something wrong with these reverbs. Okay, let's look at the structure here. It's just one instrument, so, it's a lot easier. But how do you use all these patches? What are they meant for? Well, the Maestro patches are basically patches with several sounds that you can control in various ways. I'm going to talk more about that later. Then you have the individual articulation patches. If you just want to load one sound and just use that, maybe you want to save memory, for example, or you just like it better. Then you have the FX, which is about different sounds that you can also make with the harp. Interesting for sort of design work. And then you have different kinds of recorded glissandos. And I just wanted to say that recorded or pre-recorded glissandos is probably the best way to make it sound realistic. But there are ways you can program your own glissandos, and I'm going to show you later a few tricks how you can do that in your DAW, so stay tuned. Let's talk about the Maestro patches here. So this time, it seems like East and West wanted to try something different with their patch names. Instead of having these complicated, long, abbreviated names with numbers that nobody really understood, they wanted to be a little bit more poetic, so they tried different names, and that would then be the way that you could differentiate the patches. Well, you let me know if that was a good idea or not, but Angels basically stands for 2 different sounds that you can control in a patch, and Maestro for 3 different sounds that you can control in a patch. So let's talk about them. Let's load this one up. So this one has, well, you can say like this. All these are controlled with the velocity layer. So there is no mod wheel basically, except a few occasions. So if I hit, this is a double hit actually. So very soft one sound, then harder. It becomes a different sound. And you could say that's just a dynamic layer. Basically, if I hit the string harder, it will sound different. Yes, that is true. But if you have the same kind of sample all the time, you will hear that and it will start to sound robotic and stale and not so real. So In this way, they have different samples that are triggered on different velocity layers. So it creates more variety in the technique and a little bit more depth and realism in the sound as well. Then Bisbigliando modulation wheels. So if I have the mod wheel all the way down, I hear, but if I go up, then I hear this sound. Sort of, what would you call it? Tremolo, trill, strumming, something like that. On the string, it's a very nice sound. And this is impossible to do on your own with the keyboard, with a harp, yes. So you might have noticed that the sample stopped by itself. And that is because it's not a script nor a loop. It is just a recorded performance. So you have to keep that in mind if you want it to keep playing. You have to re-trigger it. Interestingly enough, I don't know of many libraries out there that actually has this style included in their library. Okay, then we have Harp Angels Harmonica. And there's harmonics, sorry, not harmonica, that's something else. Angels again stands for we have two layers. So if I hit the key softly, I get a normal sort of pluck sound. And if I hit it harder, I get the harmonics. Very nice sound, the harmonics. Also something that I do not always find in the different libraries. Then Harp Angels is basically two different layers of sound, you can say. So if I play softly, I get a little bit harder. And then probably the most important patch in this whole library is the Harp key switch master, and these refers to the key switches. So I always go on about that I don't use the key switch patch too much in the Hollywood library. But in this case, I would go and say, yes, this is pretty much the only patch you need in this library because it covers you. If you just want to know which one I'm going to use, this is the one. Now let's talk about it. You can see the key switches down here. And let's look in the player and you will see all the different sounds that you get in this patch. So the pluck long is just basically when you use your fingers. Goes down to an A. Quite a range, yeah? Very nice. Then you have the thumb pick. It's a little thing you put on your thumb. And because it's not skin or nails, it sounds different, you know? If you didn't hear the difference, listen to the pluck long. Thumb pick. Just a different sound, a little thinner almost. And then you have the nail, even thinner. So one of the reasons this harp is one of the best libraries out there, actually, I'm serious, is because it has these different string techniques. You know, if you just have a pluck sample that is always the same, even though there are some different dynamic layers, it just doesn't sound real. It doesn't give you the nuance, the emotion, and the possibilities that a real harp player could do. I mean, obviously, a real harp player can do even more, but when you have these different techniques, you just have so much more to give out of the instrument, which makes it sound a lot more real. So if that interests you, creating really good harp lines, now you have the possibility with this library. All right, let's go on and let's look at the gliss technique, which is, you know, when you drag your hand across the strings, more or less. So you don't want to use the thumb pick for that or the nail pick. Well, you could, obviously, but in most cases, this sounds the best. So if I just drag the keys, there you go. Yep. Then you have repetition. It's basically a round robin sound, so you can do more repetition. Then we have double hit. It's hard to do that on your own, so the double hit is great. And then we have près de la table, which I think is French. Well, it is French, but I meant to say that I think it means close to the board, or it is pretty much the same as a guitar works. You know, well, I'm not a guitar player, you might notice that, but If you play a note closer to the fingerboard, you get a little bit of a rounder sound. But if you play a note closer to the bridge, it's much harder. Or it's different at least. And this is the same thing. If you listen to the pluck, près de la table, it almost sounds like a dulcimer in a way. They have more tension when you play closer to where the strings are attached on the harp. So, middle of the harp, and these are the près de la table. Again, why is this important? It's extremely important. You have so much more tools to create more interesting music with variety and realism. Okay, and then you have harmonics again. And bis bigliando again. And this is not realistic, but it's still quite fun. You can do big piano chords, you know. I like that. In reality, you would need quite a few harp players to do that, but it's nice. So let's look at the other sounds you find in this folder. There you have the Maestro patch, and Maestro means 3 different sounds. So we have with, bis bigliando, and without. So this is a great patch because now you have all the different sort of techniques within grasp, depending on how hard you hit the keys. So yeah, made a mistake there. There's one thing I don't like about this patch. It is that the range, it's way smaller than the other one. I don't know why that happened. I don't know if there's a reason for it with RAM or there's you don't play lower. I don't get it. Because it only goes down to a C here. And a harp can definitely go lower than that. Here is another patch then that I prefer to use, and this is the harp suspended round robin. And what's great about this is look at the range. Yeah. Much more interesting. I like these low notes. They're important to me. And this is also a great patch because it has all the different techniques in it. It says round robin, and yes, it is, but it's more of how hard you hit the keys, you get different sounds. So my tip to you is to use the Key Switch Master and the Harp Suspended Round Robin. Those two will have you covered pretty much. So the individual articulation patches is basically everything we talked about, but just that technique loaded if you feel like that's the only one you need and you want to save some RAM. Not that you need to with this library, but you have the option. Then FX, let's talk about that. We have the Solo Harp FX, and this is quite a fun one. You might think you don't need it, but seriously, you can create some interesting sounds, especially for horror movies. And if you use that, especially with some interesting effects, and even the Play Engine have a few of those, you can create some really, really cool sounds. So that's a good addition. And then we have Solo Harp, Glissando, Angelic, and Solo Harp Glissando. These are all the pre-recorded samples. And what is the difference? Well, I would say the harp glissandos is just standard glissandos up and down, more or less, you know, the normal stuff that you would think of. And the angelic one is more of performance. It's really going on and quite advanced stuff that are difficult to do. So, for example, so there's just a lot more going on there. And then the solo harp gliss is just more standard runs. these first keys from C to B are all going down, and then all the rest is going up. So here's a little bit of a critique of these glissandos, and that is basically how you're supposed to know what key does what. It's kind of impossible. You don't want to sit there and try each key every time. So the hard truth is that you have to go into the manual and check it out. I don't know if there's a specific strategy or pattern to these, but I haven't figured that out. But I'm guess somebody smarter than me will figure it out for me and let me know. But otherwise, you can't know, and you can't know by hearing it either. And I have to explain a little bit why that is. Because a harp basically doesn't have all the notes that a piano does. I'm not just talking about the range, I'm talking about actual notes. It actually can't play all the keys, it can just play certain keys. And it also has a system where it has different pedals, and you sort of detune or tune the strings differently so you can fit other scales a little bit. But that basically means, the short version is that some notes are going to be omitted and some notes are going to be doubled. You have to check that in deeper if you want to find out what it works. But that means that you don't always start on the root when you start certain scales. So you can't just listen to the root note, or sometimes there are even notes missing. So it's very hard to hear that unless you have an accompaniment in the background or the harp has before really shown clearly what harmony you're in. It's very difficult to hear that. But that means that if you have a C scale, you hear all the notes. So if you use another scale, you won't have all the notes. You have to double some and omit some by pressing different pedals on the harp so you can create different sounds. So when you do this, it might work in one scale, but it won't sound natural if you do it in another scale. So I'm going to show you two different techniques that you can use in your DAW in order to create fast glissandos. The first one is very easy and it works really well if the harp is in the background or perhaps in an orchestra. The second one is more specific and makes the harp sound more like a real harp would sound like. The first one is just use your wide keys and just basically record, dragging your fingers, maybe like this. More or less. You can work on the velocity a little bit better than I did here, but so that wasn't the most beautiful. But so if you want a little bit more even, you could maybe work on the something like that. Let's see. And if you like that, you would say, well, hey, wait a minute. This is only working in, for example, C major or A minor or D minor Dorian. But no, actually, you just move this to whatever. Let's try A flat. There we put A flat, I said. It works. So basically, just drag your fingers in C major or A minor and then drag it to the appropriate key. Voila, there's your run or glissando. But as somebody might know, this is not perfectly normal and natural, or it's less because a harp can't play all the notes. It just doesn't have all the notes, depending what key you're in. So another trick is to go and modify your MIDI data. And there's a few different ways you can do this, and it's quite easy. Now, each DAW is a little bit different, but I'm pretty sure that you can do this in all DAWs. And I would really appreciate if somebody can point out how you do this in other DAWs so that we can all help each other out. But in Cubase, you go into MIDI inserts and you have to turn it on, and then you can do all kinds of modification. But what we want to do here, and this needs to be on as well, is that you go here to scale, and I'm just going to choose a scale. Let's try pentatonic, and let's go, I don't know, E. Now, all my keys will only sound in the pentatonic E scale. So even if I hit the black keys or the white ones, it will only be E pentatonic. And why does this sound a little bit more realistic? Well, if I play a scale of C, you will hear that some notes are actually doubled because, here's a C. And the next one also will be, well, not a C, but the next, I'm playing the C on the keyboard. The next note will also be the same note there. And that's sort of kind of how a harp works. It will double some note and omit some notes. And that will make it sound way more realistic than just dragging the keys up on a normal scale. You can try anything here. I'm sure some of these scales the harp couldn't do at all, actually. But just for fun, the idea is to make it sound realistic. So major, G sharp, or even the black keys. There you go. And that's a great tip that really, really works. You can obviously also program it in like you would do in my string runs video that you can check out if you want more perfection. But I would say this is actually the best way to do it. There are some libraries out there that have different scripts and all that are very helpful. But if you don't have those libraries and you have this excellent harp, this is one way you can do it. So that's it for this great library and for this series. Maybe I will do the opus in the future. We'll see. So if you enjoy these kind of videos, it would really help me if you hit that like button and perhaps subscribe if you want more videos like this. But you can also write nice comments or help the community. And if you really want to support me, you can always join my Patreon or even check out my PayPal button. But only do that if it makes sense to you. Otherwise, watch my content and share my videos, and that will be a great support for me. So, this has been fun. Thank you very much. And until next time, this is Sam signing out. Take care.